and on all your devices with the Live 365 app. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, do you really need an extensive brake job? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know, I do appreciate it. It is actually the special Car Corner edition, and Tony Joe is here as he is every Friday to take your Car Corner questions. Number to call is 1-877-913-5357. If you got a question for me, feel free to go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. Send it in and we'll get you taken care of. That's all at the website, www.prudentmoney.com. Tony Joe, I got your mic turned up and everything.
How are you today?
I'm good. You know, sorry about the loud music when you put your headphones on. I cut it back down a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, I knew that was a little deafening.
Are you ready for some football season headed our way?
You know, just taking it a day at a time, actually, there, Tony Joe.
It's the only thing that keeps me going this time of the year.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
It's hard to believe it's already this time of year.
I know. But every year seems to come quicker and quicker. They say that happens when you get older, Bob. I wouldn't know, but that's what they say.
Oh, good to know. All right. I always tell you when you have a story to tell and that's one of the advantages of having you own a shop, because you see all kinds of things and you see mistakes that people make, and which you could probably write books. I know you could, on information that you see and you gain out of working with people on a day-to-day basis. Talk a little bit about the story about the...
Sure, okay. Well, a couple of things I've seen lately that I think would be worth bringing to the attention of our listeners, simply because it's a common mistake, well, several common mistakes on something which seems to be so simple and so trite and elementary that, you know, you'd think, well, what could I possibly learn about installing a battery? Well, I got to tell you a few things about installing a battery. It's not quite what you think it is in many cases. And let me just explain a few things that I've encountered with battery installations that were not done properly. So let's start with the top post type battery. Okay, so the battery has two posts coming in out of the top of it, one positive, one negative. We all know that. Now, the battery has to be fastened down with the proper holder fixture that comes with the vehicle, and the reason it needs to be held down good is because when you go around corners and so forth, that battery's going to bang around in there, and you can break the internal plates of the battery if you let it go back and forth and hit from side to side and hit the body and then, you know, slide around. So it's important that it's fastened down, okay? Well, that's one thing that people need to know is don't leave it loose. It can result in premature battery failure. Then you got to swap it out. Maybe it's under warranty. You get a new battery, so on and so forth. Okay, now let's talk about putting the terminals on. How hard could that be? Well, let me point out a few things. The first thing is a battery post on a top terminal battery is not the same size from the top of the post to the bottom of the post. It is tapered. It gets bigger as it goes towards the case of the battery, or the bottom of the post is bigger than the top of the post. Now, oftentimes, you got a battery in your car, and this is not just do-it-yourselfers, although this will help them too, but I've seen this with some of the parts stores that install batteries for people. And I understand the mistakes that are being made, and all people need is just a little bit of information. So let me get started with it. When you install a new battery, you're going to take the old battery out, you're going to loosen the terminal bolt, both of them, a little bit, and it's going to wiggle loose. You're going to say, wow, that's it. Take the battery terminals off, put the new battery in, fasten it down. Now comes the part where the mistakes come in. When you are installing the new terminal ends onto the new terminal post of the new battery, you want to make sure that you unscrew that bolt. If it's a bolt, sometimes it's a nut and a bolt, sometimes the nut, however it's fastened or however the clamp is retained, you want to unscrew the nut or the bolt and nut as far back as you can. Why? You know, it only took a couple of turns to remove it. Why do we have to unscrew it all the way out? The reason is because you want to unscrew the bolt all the way to the end of the threads, take a little screwdriver, and spread that terminal apart. That terminal is a clamp, but it's not one complete circle. It has an opening at one end, and that's made to spread out and clamp down. And the reason you want to open that up is so you get it as wide as possible so you can install the terminal end onto the new post down as far as possible, so you get the fat part of the battery terminal to have something to clamp to. Now at this point, instead of just hooking the battery terminal and spreading the post and doing everything that Tony says to do, you want to look at the inside diameter of that terminal end. If it's got corrosion in it, now's the time to clean it. You want to make sure it's clean, shiny, and tight. So we're going to clean the inside of that. There's regular brushes you can buy to get the inside of that round terminal end clean and the inner post of the terminal on the end of the battery cable. We want it clean and tight. We want to install it, and we want to push it all the way down as far as we can to get on the fatter part of the post. When you tighten that bolt back down, you should have some space in between that clamp that you spread out with the screwdriver. If it clamps completely together, then that terminal end is no good anymore. It really needs to be replaced. It is stretched to the point of not being able to keep a good clamp on the post anymore, and it will eventually come loose. Now, there's one other thing I want to add to this before we get off that part, and that is keeping those clamps clean and tight is very important. So when you're done tightening the post, you want to look at it and make sure it's not loose. You can grab it with your fingers, move it back and forth. If you can move it, you better start over because it's not going to work for very long.
Sounds like a lot of details.
Oh, we've got more. Don't worry. Plenty more.
1-877-913-5357. Anything else you want to say about that?
Do we have time?
We got a couple of minutes.
Yeah. I want to say that when you don't have them completely clean and tight, and I've seen this before, when a car comes in with a battery that was put in a couple of days ago, and now the guy says, I'm having trouble starting it, and I pop the hood, and I've seen this many times. One of the terminal ends, if it's really loose or has a lot of corrosion on it, you're going to have resistance in that post. Resistance creates heat. Now, with my old broken knuckle hands and 45 years of doing this, I just touch them to see if they're hot. You may not want to do that. You can use an infrared gun. You can use several different devices to see if one terminal is hotter than the other. If it is, you got a lot of resistance in there. That needs to be addressed because what will happen, and I've seen this also, if that post comes loose because it wasn't properly secured when the new battery was installed, the negative side maybe you can turn it with your hands, but nobody knows that. So as you're driving down the road, all that resistance builds up, and guess what suffers a traumatic breakdown, and that's the alternator. The alternator can get so hot trying to put power into that battery, but it's got a very bad connection, so it builds up a lot of heat, and eventually the alternator blows a diode or something worse, the regulator. In any case, you can cost yourself a $400 or $500 alternator just by having a loose battery terminal.
1-877-913-5357. Had an email come in from a lady, and this is the listener. This is something that we get 3 or 4 times a year, and talking about a major brake job. When it comes down to it, how do you know that you need a major brake job? You know, there's the brakes are making a squealing noise, and it just really is kind of, if you don't know what you're looking for, it's tough to self-diagnose.
Yeah, you don't know if you need a major brake job. Most people aren't going to know that. The trick is to, I guess, have the proper questions prepared so that you can understand more of, you want to know what happened and you want to know why it happened. So let's just take a couple of general overall rules of thumb. Number one, when your car has 70 or 80,000 miles on it, and you start to hear noises from the brakes, and you take it into a shop, at 70 or 80,000, now don't get me, this is not Bible, this is just general rule of thumb. The front end of the vehicle is going to get the majority of the wear and tear on the brakes. Unless it's a heavily loaded work truck, which is always loaded down, then you can make an exception for that. But most cars that we see out there today are going to get 70% of the braking effort is going to be from the front. So you're generally going to see the front end brakes are going to be the ones that are needed first, generally.
Now, when you say brakes, are you meaning just brake pads?
No, I mean brake pads and probably rotors. The reason for that is, but see, complete brake job is all 4 wheels. So what I'm trying to get to is you want to ask, okay, what's wrong with my brakes? Well, you need a whole brake job. Okay, you look at the mileage and you say, well, I've got 70 to 80,000. And I remember somebody one time said, generally, at that point, the fronts are going to have far more wear than the backs. So do I really need the rear brakes done at this time or just the fronts? Because there are cases where I've seen oftentimes you're going to wear out a couple of, by the time you wear out your second pair of front pads, you may need rear brakes at that point, whether they're pads or shoes. But generally, you're not going to need all 4 brakes done all at the same time the very first time you need brakes. Mostly it's going to be the front brakes that get most of the wear. So when they tell you you need a whole brake job or you need a major brake job, as you're putting it, Bob, I consider that to be, all 4 wheels.
Oh, yeah.
So you want to just question the person a little bit about what is it that you're charging me for? Is it just the fronts? Do I need them in the back? How are the backs? Can you inspect them and tell me if they're anywhere near ready to go out yet, or are they still pretty good? And, of course, there's other things that can be involved with a brake job, like hydraulic system problems. Well, you need new brake lines. Well, are they leaking, or are they, swollen to where they look like one of them may blow out? Are they ripped, torn, or somehow are they not, the integrity is such that you think I need to replace them, and why?
So Chris sent up a question, and we always have to answer Chris's questions because he can turn us off.
Chris is the boss. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so Chris wants to know, are front rotors more susceptible to warping or back rotors?
Front ones are, Chris. Now, let me just say this about that subject. Keep in mind that the new cars, this is not new. This has been going on for years. But as they downsize the cars and they want to make them more fuel efficient, they're going to try to eliminate the weight anywhere they can. Well, one of the places that they have eliminated excess weight is in the amount of metal that they put into the manufacturer of a new brake rotor. They make it thinner than it used to be, and they make it out of a different material. When you wear out a set of brake pads, chances are, and this should not come as a surprise if the mechanic tells you this, chances are those rotors are going to have to be replaced. They don't have to be grooved up or destroyed in any way. They're just so thin that you cannot resurface them anymore, because if you try to take enough metal off with a brake lathe, like we used to, you'll find that the brake material gets beyond the minimum thickness of the safety that the DOT prints on that rotor. There's a minimum thickness that the DOT prints right on that rotor. If you go below that minimum thickness, you're now endangering the lives of the people that you're doing the brake job for. So most of the time now, you can pretty much bet you're going to need new rotors. Brand new rotors out of the box. They're straight. They're resurfaced properly. You've got a whole new fresh set of metal to start with. But I would caution some of the rotors that are really low-cost rotors. And the reason for that is because I've seen really cheap rotors, even though they're brand new, you want to compare them to the old rotor and count the fins in between the two disc materials that the rotor is comprised of. The fin material in between the two sections of metal rotor are there for air cooling. And if you get a really cheap rotor online or something, you pull it out of the box and it's only got a third of or half the fins that the original rotor had, you really don't want to use it. It will end up heating up really quickly. It'll become warped. You'll have to replace the rotors again within 20,000 miles or so, and you don't want to have to go through all that. It's better to just buy better material, better parts, so that you don't have to do it over again, or a shop won't have to do it over again. That's one caution I would make on rotors.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. You know, let's talk a little bit about something that you don't hear much about, the master cylinder. Talk about what that does, and I mean, is that something that you also replace at some point?
Well, you can. Master cylinders have a couple of different issues that can happen to them. They can leak externally. They can also leak into the brake booster, which is not visible when you look at it, because the brake booster and the master cylinder are coupled together and then bolted. So you can't really see if it's leaking into the brake booster. However, the master cylinder can often, like I said, it can leak where you can see it, visual leak, or it can bypass, which means it loses pressure. You're sitting at a light, and your brake pedal feels like normal, and as you're sitting at a long, extended light, the brake pedal kind of sinks a little bit, and you can feel it in your foot. It seems like it's going lower and lower and lower. You pump it up, and it comes right back to normal, but it kind of sinks. Now, that's something that we don't see a lot of anymore, but it used to be very common, and that would be the seals inside the master cylinder that are bypassing the pressure. If you take the master cylinder off because you're losing fluid and you suspect you can't find a visual leak externally, you might remove the two bolts that hold the master cylinder on, remove it, pull it away, and look at the very back side of the master cylinder. If it's leaking through the rear seal, it will go into the vacuum booster, which is under vacuum, which means the fluid will be sucked right back into the engine through that vacuum hose and burned. Now, that's bad. That's not good for the engine, first of all, but it's also not good for the vacuum booster. The vacuum booster has a big rubber diaphragm that separates two portions of the booster itself. And if that rubber diaphragm is exposed to brake fluid, it'll eat a hole through there. Now you not only need a master cylinder, you're going to need a power brake booster, because it's going to take two men and a boy to push that pedal down. You won't have any power assist.
Let me ask you this. I heard this, and I thought it was interesting that brake pads don't wear evenly. They wear unevenly. Is that...
Well, they should wear evenly. When they don't wear evenly, there's a reason for it. And this is something that, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, this is something you need to really identify when you're removing the brakes to put new pads on. If you've got one thick pad on, say, the inside of the caliper and one thin pad on the outside of the caliper, then it tells you something. If you don't know what that means, you should research it a little bit. In fact, what it means is the caliper is sliding to compress the pads within the rotor to do its job. but it's not releasing. It is not sliding back to relax so that the pad is not rubbing on the rotor while you're driving it down the road. And this oftentimes comes from not greasing the caliper pins or the sliding mechanisms. They get stuck, they get water in them, they get mud and dirt, and they need to be removed and cleaned out, clean the holes out, and put grease on the pins, and then reinstalled. And when you're done with the brakes, you should be able, with one hand, to move that caliper back and forth so that you know it's applying and releasing.
We mentioned timing change a while ago, but there's still cars with timing belts.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about when, at what mileage those tend to go out, or you probably need to change them.
Okay, there's no given rule on a general timeline on timing belts. Cars still do have them. A lot of cars are going to chains now, which is good. The thing about a chain that you want to remember is to keep the oil changed. If the chain has clean, fresh oil, keeping it lubricated, it will last the life of the car. Now, timing belts are different. That is a belt just like a fan belt used to be, or a serpentine belt today. The rubber will eventually break down, deteriorate, get weak, and there's a time interval on a timing belt. The only way to know when it's due is it's documented. All of them are documented somehow. You go to the manufacturer and you look it up, or you go to the internet and you can find it on there. There's a documented timeline on how long your make and model timing belt should be serviced. They should be changed at either 70,000, 80,000. Some of them go to 105. Some are at 60. So it's important to know the timeline.
So given that, and I may be mistaken on this, I think I've heard you one time say that the timing belt is hard to get to. You have to take apart a lot of the engine to get to it. So if you're going through the labor cost of taking an engine apart, what else should you be considering checking while you're there? Because it just, a cheaper part's a cheaper part. You're paying for the labor anyway.
Right. See, here's the thing about a timing belt. Most standard operating procedure now for anybody doing a timing belt is to get the timing belt kit. The timing belt is just like any other belt that you're familiar with. It will break down and deteriorate over time, and it could snap and break, and then you're going to have major engine problems in most cases. So what you want to do is replace everything that timing belt touches, because if you change the timing belt and nothing else, the bearing on the water pump, which is usually involved, or the bearing on the tensioners, the bearing on some of the balance shafts or oil pump drives, anything that belt touches, you want to replace it if it's got a bearing in it. So what you do is you buy the timing belt kit. It comes with all the materials that you need to replace the tensioners, the stationary idlers, the water pump if that's involved, which in a lot of cases it is. And you change all those parts at once, because once you get to the timing belt, you have access to all this stuff to change it. You don't have to go any deeper. You're right there, and you want to do a good comprehensive job, which means if you don't change the water pump and you change the timing belt and you do a great job and you're flexing your muscles and you're proud of yourself, in 3 months that bearing could go out inside the water pump and break the timing belt in half, and you just destroyed all the effort that you were attempting to make to try to keep that engine from having bent valves or major damage by not replacing that water pump. You should have replaced it while you were in there. That way, everything that belt touched is going to have good bearings in it, and it's you very little chance that anything's going to go wrong until the next interval, say at another 105,000 miles.
So the advice there is, if your mechanic comes back and suggests that you do other additional work because it explains the math, you really need to listen to that, not just assume you're being upsold.
Well, yeah, you're not being upsold. It's the very common practice now when you have a timing belt replaced, because the belt itself can cost $30, but the labor is pretty intensive, and you don't want to do all that without doing all the other parts that were involved. So when you have a timing belt, most mechanics or service writers or whoever you're talking to. They're going to explain this to you. And timing belts overall are not an inexpensive repair, but it is a necessary repair. It's a maintenance type item that has to be done because that timing belt can break.
This is Bob Brooks. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time. Keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.